Hi everyone, Teri Wellbrock here. Just a little message before we start the interview that I have started reading some new books, and I'm that person that can read 20 books at one time. My friends are always saying to me, "How can you keep track of what you're reading?" And I guess my brain compartmentalizes each book. But I was going through my shelf and I was actually looking for some books to donate and came across a Louise Hay book. And I always write on the inside cover what year I had read it. And this one I had read in 2001, so 21 years ago, as crazy as that sounds. And I just started reading it again. I think the title of it is You Can Heal Your Life or Heal Your Life. And it's so speaking to me, but I love it that as I read it, I'm thinking, done that, do that. Yep, doing that. And a lot about positive affirmations and just the way we talk to ourselves. So if you have an opportunity, you might want to check out that book and read through it. It was, again, speaking to me right when I needed it most, just as reminders and a little cheering me on that knowing how far I've come in the 21 years since I first read it. Just keep researching, finding things that work for you, and keep listening to these episodes. Not everything is going to resonate, but you might find those things that really click with you. Today's episode is one of those that just really, really spoke to me on so many levels. Such an amazing guest, brilliant, brilliant woman. And I won't talk any longer. Here it is. Welcome, everybody, to the Healing Place podcast. I'm your host, Teri Wellbrock, and so excited to have Kat Lee with me here today. And I was just on her show, maybe within the last 2 weeks. It was such a beautiful conversation. So I feel very blessed to have her here joining us today. So welcome, Kat.
Thank you so much for creating this space. And I had such a great time connecting with you on my podcast. It just makes sense that I get to be on yours and we'll just share the love with our communities all the way around.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You said share the love. I have my Turn Up the Love
shirt
on.
Yeah.
It seems so appropriate. Normally I try to wear a little, because now it just looks like I have a white t-shirt on, but normally I'll try to wear, something a little more, I don't know, podcast host-ish. Not that I should, but I was like, oh no, I have to throw this shirt on today. It just felt like the vibe. So
yeah, well, I show up in my pajamas, so this is our world these days.
Yeah, right. I love it. Yeah. So you are an intimacy and relationship coach, a podcaster, yes, and so much more. So talk to everybody a little bit about what it is you're doing in the world.
Well, if I could boil down what I'm trying to establish for my clients, it's really about approaching intimacy as a spiritual practice. I think that a lot of times we have this idea around intimacy with others as being like a to-do checklist. And I certainly lived the first 30 years of my life that way, of like, find the guy, figure out, like who you're going to marry the guy, and then start clicking off all those to-do boxes, like buy the house and, the cars and the dogs and all of that. And then we can also look at intimacy as self as being a space where a lot of us tend to lose our way. And we all have these core wounds. It's usually one or two core wounds. And they're actually directly related to our Tao and our purpose. And if I look at my own life, I can speak about my own life, is I had I grew up as a second generation immigrant. And so my parents immigrated to the States from Korea, and they had difficulty, figuring out American life, not knowing the language and all of this. And so I learned how to control things as a way to survive. And it showed up a lot in my relationship with my brother, who had struggles emotionally in his teenage years and tried to commit suicide multiple times. And it also showed up in my relationship with my ex-husband. And when I look at that aspect of control, it was really about, this is how I learned how to survive in my life, right? And so if I stopped controlling things, then I was so scared that things were going to fall away and things were not going to turn out okay. And in the literal case of my brother, like I might lose my brother. And I'm finding now that my purpose, and this is what I call my Tao, it's connected to my Taoist practices, my spirituality, is really about finding ways to help me surrender and then allowing that surrender to ripple out into my community. And that can look any number of ways, right? And so finding intimacy to self is really about, okay, so what is the stories, the narratives, conditions that people are walking around with all the time that they may not even be conscious of? And how can we help them feel safe enough to release those stories, narratives, and conditions so that actually their purpose can come through and they get to lead their life from a sense of intimacy with self and walk through understanding that there is that they have the exact right experiences to be able to share this with their world, right? So being on one side of the pendulum of control helps me understand that I can support people who struggle with that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that spirituality to me is a subtractive process. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we go out into the world thinking I need to find the next book, the next podcast, the next guru, the next teacher, the next coach, whatever it is. And we are constantly, and this is what marketing tells us too, is we have to fill in the void, this empty space that we feel inside of us. And we need to fill in that void with things from the external world. And the more and more I align with my spiritual practices and my sense of intimacy with self, I'm learning that it's more about shedding those layers of stories and conditions and narratives that we build up as survival mechanisms, and not shedding them in a way where it's like let's get rid of that part, let's fracture that part of me and like send it as far away as possible. It's about acknowledging and being grateful for that part for helping you survive and saying, okay, like you can relax now, it's okay, like I've got this, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that helped
Yes.
answer your
No, I
question.
love it. And we had, I was just like, oh my gosh, I was relating to so much of what you were saying on a soul level in many ways, because one of the things you were talking about was just sharing. I think as people share their truths, especially those dark truths, those traumas that we've been through, those tough moments, that as we do so, we are able to heal, and then I don't want to say it, like embrace it as a part of our journey. And I know as I did so, wow, I mean, things just really started to transition. And what you said about like, then we're able to see how we have these patterns. And mine was trust issues. And but yeah, the control thing, shoo, that was speaking to me.
Yeah, yeah. And it's about integrating that, right? Like we don't want to let go of these parts of us that make us feel safe, like because that's going to make us ultimately feel even more unsafe and then grip even tighter to that survival strategy. And so how can we set up your environment in a way that things feel safe? And oftentimes we need an external person, either a friend or some family member or a coach who can help you just see the stories as they lay, instead of you projecting your own story of threat and insecurity onto circumstances that are happening in the now but are being colored by your past, right? So I find that a lot of my work is really about helping folks like sort of untangle which voice is theirs and which voice is their ego, which is really just about helping. It creates this narrative around you being unsafe so that it protects you, right? That's what the ego does. Or the voice of the inner child who's really just scared. Or there are all these parts of you. You may even have parts of you where it's the voice of your mother who's told you something so many times over and over and over again that you've internalized it, And so it's really about helping you untangle which voices are not yours to hold and which voices no longer serve you, and how can we strip away just to the core of who you are and align with that and live your life from that space, right? And since I've started doing that, my life has changed dramatically. I've chosen partners that are so different from what I would have expected my life to look like. I am happily nomadic. You think you're supposed to have the you know, big house with the 2-car garage and all of that. And I've actually decided to live my life untethered to a place. And so I spend a lot of my time in Canada. I spend a lot of my time in Nevada and in California because that's where my communities live. And so it's what makes me the happiest. And my career is so different. Like I had the career that every acupuncturist dreams of when they graduate from acupuncture school. That was my previous career. And I gave that up to be a coach and support people virtually. And I couldn't be happier. And all of that comes from a place of safety and alignment with my Tao and my purpose. And if you're led from that place, then you don't worry about, is this decision right or is this decision wrong? I have a lot of people who struggle with making even small decisions because they've not had a chance to check in with their bodies and really check in with the wisdom of their bodies, because your body's going to tell you some messages about what is okay for you and what's not okay for you. And it's about creating a relationship with the body, and that comes through with a lot of the somatic work that I do. It's about creating that relationship so that you are not just leading from logical space, because logic can list out all the pros and cons and make a very well reasoned argument for or against something. But sometimes that logical choice is not the right one. And because in this culture we have a tendency to validate logic, and we validate you know um, doing things according to a particular pattern, and we validate these ways that a lot of us live our lives, and we get to the top of the mountain, standing up there with our big house, 2-car garage, and 2.5 children, and we're like, why do I feel so empty? It's because at some point you got led astray and you didn't listen to your body when she was saying, no, this isn't the right path, we want to do something else, right?
Yeah. And I've talked about that often, of when
Mm-hmm.
you go down that path, I think the universe, God, angels, spirit, whatever it is, yourself, your own spirit,
Mm-hmm.
you keep getting redirected. Like something's like,
Yes.
no, 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 no. This way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's another Y in the road. Go this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we create all that shame around it too,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, but I'm not supposed to go down that path, you know and this is what happens when you're able to actually integrate those shadows of you. You aren't scared of that fork in the road, because it's not you know it's not a space where you're worried about what's going to happen down that road. You know that you can handle whatever shows up along either road.
Yeah. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's what you said. It's the shame of the shoulds. It's,
Mm-hmm.
the society, family, friend, whom, whatever, yourself
Mm-hmm.
saying,
Mm-hmm.
I should be doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
When your
absolutely.
spirit is saying, no, listen. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So one of the questions or topics that I had talked about was, we talk often on the show about trauma recovery. Much of the
Mm-hmm.
audience are ACEs, adverse childhood
Mm-hmm.
experience survivors.
Mm-hmm.
And so you talk about trauma wounds and trauma informed practices and how we can get back into alignment with ourselves. And I know you just tapped on
Mm-hmm.
that a little bit, but can you touch upon trauma wounds and then trauma informed practices?
Yeah. So I think being trauma informed, it's been thrown out so much in the social media world these days. And I want to be really clear that when a practitioner claims that they are trauma informed, my expectation is that they have taken courses and worked with teachers who have a lot of experience working with trauma, and they have the capacity to hold people in their traumas because they've done their own work. Oftentimes, like I find practitioners who are looking at trauma from a very intellectual space and from a very scholastic space. And in order to do trauma work in the real world, you have to do your own work. And so I think about my my biggest responsibility to my clients, my biggest commitment to my own clients is that I do my own work so that I have the capacity and I'm a big enough container to hold whatever shows up in that session, right? And so I want to make that really explicitly clear that if there's a practitioner out there who's claiming that they are trauma informed and you're thinking about working with them, ask them what their experience is like. Ask them about, who their teachers are, ask them, what do they do in their own world to do their own work and continue to deepen their practices. And I think that that's really important to just note and say.
Yes. And I'm so
Um,
glad you brought that up because we have the right to ask.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to me personally, having been in the healthcare field for 12 years now, I am less concerned because I've seen lots of unethical practitioners out there. I'm less concerned about the letters on the back of your name and more concerned about how I feel when I'm in your presence. So if my nervous system feels settled and it feels safe, that tells me that you've done your work, right? It's how I feel when I'm sitting with you, Teri. It's like I can tell just from how you ask questions, how you slow down, how you have this gaze that just is so present. It tells me that you've done your own work, and that's the kind of safety that I'm looking for when I'm looking for my own practitioner. And I think that that's actually what people should be looking for when they're looking for practitioners is somebody who makes them feel safe. It doesn't matter if it's a doctor or a therapist, like you have choices out there, right? I think oftentimes we get funneled into thinking, oh, I just need to pick whatever, just pick somebody off of a list, right? Talk to them and see how your nervous system feels, because if your nervous system doesn't feel that safety, then you're only going to go so far in their work.
Right. Oh, and it
um,
is such, I love that too. Wow. And I mean, certainly feel the same. I've told you, your energy just makes me feel at peace. And so
mm,
and I talk about energy quite a bit here. And I used to not be in tune with that, but as I did the healing work, you really do start to become more in tune with how do I feel in the presence of this person? And,
yeah,
what am I receiving on an energy level? And
yeah,
it's so accurate. And I think we have a teenage daughter and we talk to her often about if you're getting a bad vibe, if you're getting weird energy, whatever, it's okay to walk away, like honor that.
yeah,
And I know women, I
yeah.
mean, I think we're learning, but we're very
Mm-hmm.
intuitive and very in touch with that. And to honor it, oh, just so
Mm-hmm.
huge, so huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's such an important skill to teach, especially to a teenage girl, because I know growing up, I imagine that for you too, I was taught so many strategies on how to override the sensations that are coming from your body, right?
Yep.
Whether that came from sexuality, whether that came from what I wanted to do with my life, even just, like what I wanted to eat, I feel like was not a welcome discussion. And so I think this all goes back to somatic work for me, because the closer and more intimate relationship you have with your body, then you're guided from that place of deep knowing. And and the tricky part is that trauma blocks us from our bodies.
Yeah.
If you if you think about it, it's like for a lot of people, especially if they've had big T trauma, but also if you've had little T trauma, like if you've had big T trauma, your spirit gets kicked out of your body for a minute because it was too unsafe of an environment for you. And so it takes a lot of work to call that spirit back into your body, right? And if you've had little T trauma, it's like you've been told over and over and over again that that gut feeling that exists in your stomach or that exists in your chest and or exists in your hips, like that gut feeling that you know isn't important, and you're told that over and over and over again, then you start to disconnect from that part of you because it's like it's too painful to go through experiences knowing that my body already knows. And so a lot of times people will just live from their shoulders on up. And that's what I see walking around in the world, right? Especially in the light of the last year. Like 2020 was just, it's been so interesting having done trauma work and looking at how people are reacting to these social movements that are happening, whether or not you want to get vaccinated. It's everybody's traumas are coming out on display here. And it's so interesting because like it may be on the surface, it might look like, you know, somebody doesn't want to get vaccinated because for whatever reason, you know, and you're having an argument on that like head, like butting level, and it's so frustrating. But if you started to get curious and started asking questions about what that vaccine means to that other person, I find that it's almost never actually about the vaccine. It's about, how was their freedom taken away from their body space as when they were younger? How were medical procedures stepped into in their history? Were medical procedures forced upon them in their history? Do they have a history of rape? Because the idea of something being done to your body when you don't feel like you trust it is a really, really hard place for people to go to. And so, on the surface level, you might be arguing about a vaccine and going through the logical steps of like, but you should get it because these numbers and these statistics, and the CDC says this, and the WHO says this, but you aren't going to be able to actually understand until you get down to that trauma level. And then on the flip side as well, somebody may have felt safe trusting an authority figure over themselves, and that's just how they've lived their life. And so if, the CDC says that they need to get the vaccine, then of course they get the vaccine, right? And I'm not saying this on the side of either being pro-vax or anti-vax. I'm just saying this from the space of, instead of looking at these arguments from these like surface level areas, can we actually emotionally attune with each other as human beings? And I think that that's what we're all being called to do. And if you're feeling that calling, you're going to have to do some deep, deep trauma work to be able to access that emotional attunement space, because there's a lot of trauma walking around in the world.
Yes, and that's the most beautiful picture painting that I've heard yet on
Mm-hmm.
the two approaches of be vaccinated, don't be vaccinated, and it is so true. But I say it so often on the show, we are all on our own healing journeys, and
Mm-hmm.
if we can take that approach, it just sounds exactly what you were just saying is
Yeah.
you just have to say, that person's on their own healing journey. And so
Mm-hmm.
they need to do it their way because
Mm-hmm.
of where they are in their history and where they are along that journey.
Mm-hmm. And it
Yeah.
all comes down to emotional attunement, I
Yeah.
think. Is like, if this is someone that you love, um, if your mom is on the opposite side of you, like, can you get down to an emotional attunement level instead of arguing? Like, what does that vaccine mean to you? And fill in the blank of whatever that is. What is the Black Lives Matters protest mean to you? This is really triggering for you. And so I'm curious about like what this is bringing up for you, and emotionally attune on that level instead of attuning on the level of like logic and like going at it with each other.
Yeah. And there's a part of me that it popped into my head as you were talking that you have so many of these keyboard warriors on social media, on Twitter and Facebook or wherever, and they just lose their minds, on a subject, and you wonder. I so want to say, oh, what's your ACEs score? What was your childhood
Yes.
like? What was your trauma history? Because were you silenced for so long, and now
Yes.
you feel as if you have a voice, but you're safe because
Behind a
you're
keyboard,
hidden,
behind a
you're
screen.
you're at the keyboard instead.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's where it's like, I finally have this voice and I can say it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not only just that they have a voice now, it's that now there's a whole community of people who likely also have high ACEs scores who are validating that post, who are liking it, who are retweeting
Yeah.
it, doing all the things that tells you, oh, like it's actually better for you to stay in this wounded space instead of like evolving out of it.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Wow, we could do a whole study on that. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's deep
Mm-hmm.
and powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, interesting. All right, so let's get into one of the other things I wanted to talk about. I made little notes for myself.
Yeah.
Insecure attachment patterns.
Mm-hmm.
That one also resonated with me, only because I've lived it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so and I know it's again one of those subjects, like one of my, I think, most viewed YouTube um interviews is
Yeah.
about
Insecure
um
attachments.
attachment. Yeah, insecure
Yeah.
attachment. Yeah.
Yeah. So that terminology comes from attachment theory. And um, I speak about it a little bit differently because there are four attachment styles. There's the secure, there's the anxious avoidant, there's the anxious, and then there's the avoidantly attached, right? And so the anxious avoidant is a combination of the two. And again, I think that if we do that curious work that goes beyond just, surface level, why are you doing this? It always goes back to our family of origin. And so, how you were attuned with when you were a child taught you how to survive. And one of the things that we need to survive as infants is we need love. So, how did you learn to find love, trust, and belonging in your family of origin? And so, for some people, it meant that you had to be really, really small and had to be quiet and had to detach actually to receive love, trust, and belonging. And in other families, it meant that you had to be really, like, really, really connected at the hip in order to receive that love, trust, and belonging. And there's like a million iterations of what these stories can look like, right? And then when you grow up, you don't just like, I turned 18 and ta-da, I'm an adult and now I'm just going to go find secure attachments. You carry those strategies on into your adult relationships. And I certainly did this for, you know, many years in my life as well. I'm classically an anxiously attached person. And so when I think about that, it goes back to my history with my brother, where if I wasn't on top of him all the time, I could actually literally lose him. I used to sit outside of his door when he was taking a shower with my ear pressed up against the shower door or up against the bathroom door because I was scared that he was going to drown himself. And if I could hear any sort of like break in his activity and his movement, I would knock on the door. And so, like, that didn't go away with my first relationship, which was my ex-husband, right? Like, I had to keep tabs on every single movement happening in his life, which was not a healthy way to walk into a relationship.
Right.
And I I think that a lot of times Western medicine has a tendency to want to put people into boxes. And so, like, you can very clearly put me into the box of the anxious attached, right? But then it takes out the nuance of the entire person, right? Because in certain relationships, I could be avoidantly attached. In certain relationships, because I feel safe, I could be securely attached. In certain relationships, I might have a mix of both. And so I could be anxious and avoidant, right? And so I think it's really important to take out the boxes. It's the same way that we think about our sexuality, right? Like it's a spectrum, it's a fluid space that we all float around as human beings. And um, and so if we can think about these as being more strategies that we needed to survive, instead of this is who you are and this is who you're going to be, which is what frustrates me about attachment theory actually, is a lot of the books that I've read is about identifying which attachment pattern you are most like. And then if you're anything but a secure attacher, then go find somebody who's securely attached, right? So that's the most common book that I've seen out there on the market is Attached by Amir. Oh gosh, I can't remember his last name. But he says that outrightly, is like, if you are not securely attached, go find somebody else who is, right? And that's not helpful, especially if you're in a relationship where there is that pendulum swing. A lot of times anxious and avoidant attached partners find each other because they're working something out together, right? And so they're meant to be together on some level, whether it's forever or for this moment, but they're meant to learn something from each other. And so it negates that healing relationship that can happen in actually a pendulum swing partnership. So I think attachment theory is a really good framework to help you understand, but you have to take it beyond that. You have to take a trauma-informed approach, which is, okay, so we know this about you. How did this serve you in the past, right? And is that story still true? Because if we're telling people go find somebody who's securely attached, it keeps re-traumatizing that wound within that says you're not good enough, you can't do this by yourself, that you need somebody else to rely on, you can't do this work. Like, what makes you think that you could be unbroken from this, right? And I don't stand by that at all. Like, I think that everybody has the capacity to heal. I mean, you have such a difficult story when it comes to trauma, and you look on this side of it and it's like you've taken all that and integrated it in a way that you're not playing out those past traumas, that past history, that past story onto your everyday experiences, right?
Right.
And I think that that's what we need to do when it comes to attachment theory as well. It's like, okay, so you have some trauma in your past. How can we help you move forward in a way that you're not overlaying the pain and hurt that you received from your mom, the pain and hurt that you received from your first boyfriend, and you're not overlaying that onto the current human being who's standing right in front of you, who comes with their own nuanced history of trauma as well, right? And so that's how I think about attachment theory.
Yes. Oh my gosh, beautiful explanation. And again, just I love the way you paint the picture because it resonated. And one of the things you said, the word that stuck out was learned, because as you were speaking, I was saying to myself, so many of us, if we can take a step back and say, what do I need to learn from this particular relationship? And because like you said, it's not that we need to find that person that's in a secure relationship, but maybe this person needs to be in our life right now because we need to learn a lesson. Yes. They need to learn a lesson, and we need to be there with each other along that part of the journey. And I love that idea. But the but that I have to throw in is that we have to be able to be in a place where we are open to learning. Yes. And we're open to that healing message that we can gain from that tumultuous, sometimes tumultuous relationship.
Absolutely. I know that when it comes to my attachment wounds, the person I have learned the most from is my previous partner, who was avoidantly attached. Like, so like we were on like opposite ends of the spectrum, and but the difference is that we were both so willing to learn from each other. Like there was so much love and trust and accountability in the relationship that I started looking at his strategy and being like, oh, actually, him stepping away from the conversation is something that I need to do. I just need to do it in a way that I'm not running away. Right. And him looking at my strategy and being like, oh, sweeping things under the rug hasn't worked for me in the past. I should maybe talk about things. Right. And so we started this dialogue back and forth of looking at the other side of the pendulum and being like, okay, so I don't want to run away, but how can I create space to have my time? I'm talking from his point of view. Like, how can I create some space for me so that I can have time to process and integrate what just happened? Because that's all he's needing when he's needing that space, right? And I'm looking at the situation and being like, okay, so how can I give him that space without clinging and checking in and always needing to have like an update on things, and trust that he is actually doing the work, right? And so there's been so much that he and I have learned by being with each other, in that process of like bridging that attachment wound gap, right?
Yeah.
And I've learned so much in terms of like taking a sacred pause, so important. And I didn't know how to do that before him.
Oh,
So
I love that.
important.
I love that. I love that word, a sacred pause. I mean, what a
Mm-hmm.
gift you're giving, not just to yourself, but to that person that's in the other half of that relationship with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I told you we could sit and talk for hours on end. So, how is there anything else that you wanted to touch upon that we haven't had an opportunity to talk about yet?
No, this feels good. This feels like a good overview of the work that I do. So thank you for creating this space.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So how do people connect with you? How do they find you?
Yeah. So my website is empoweredcuriosity.com. And I'm on Instagram, which is the same handle, Empowered Curiosity. And I'm fairly active on Instagram. So if you're over there, then just pop on over, send me a DM. I'm always open to having conversations with folks. And yeah, I do one-on-one work. I do group coaching containers. Um, I'm in the process of writing a book right now. So yeah, there's going to be lots of stuff coming down the pipeline.
Awesome. Oh, when your book is launched, come back on. We'll
Oh,
tell
I would
everybody
love
about
that.
it. So,
I'd love
yay.
that.
And I know on Instagram, this son, I can never point him out, Jacob. Um, oh my gosh, when Instagram first started like coming onto the scene, I had made an Instagram account, and I have one, and every now and then I'll put something out on it. But he was like, "Mom, your hashtags," and I was like, "I don't even know what a hashtag is." So I don't know. I just can't grasp what I do better with Instagram than Twitter. Don't even like Twitter.
I
I
can't
can't
do
even wrap my head
Twitter.
around it.
Yeah. I'm I don't know. I can't do Twitter. I can't do the TikTok. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like
no.
Instagram is the only one that makes sense for me.
Yeah, and Instagram's awesome. Like it seems to be almost like that's really the place right now where things are just kabooming,
Mm-hmm.
and YouTube. I mean, I know YouTube, you can certainly get messages out. I don't think it's as much as a conversation goes on like it does on Instagram or
Yeah.
interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and just the
Thank
beautiful work you
you.
do in the world.
Thank you for your work, and thanks for creating the space for me to show up.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for being with us here today. And remember, until next time, be gentle with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Bye bye. Hey, everybody. Teri Wellbrock again. Just wanted to thank you for listening to the episode today and remind you to visit my website as well as the academy.teriwellbrock.com for the courses. But if you go to my website, teriwellbrock.com, you can sign up for my monthly Hope for Healing newsletter, which is also jam-packed with information and strategies and blog pieces and guest blog pieces and links to shows, and just a great space for, again, healing and hope strategies. Thanks for, again, being here and being a part of this healing space. I very much appreciate you. All right. Bye-bye.